1, 2 testing. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. It's like a full house. I'm so happy about it. The panelists were introduced quickly, but could you give me a quick introduction about yourself and a little bit about your company, starting with Jack here?
Yeah, so hi, everyone. I'm Jack. I've been in crypto for the last 10 years. I've been building and working in different projects in the last 7. The company I'm advocating for is RSS3. So the goal is to make sure that data stays open. So you can have your open AI models, but without data to train it, that you're not really getting the full benefit of the models. So that's what we're doing, making sure that data is open and accessible for everybody.
Yes, and my name is Estem. I'm part of the DFINITY Foundation. I'm an engineer, part of the DFINITY Foundation for about 5 years now. And at the DFINITY Foundation, we contribute to the Internet Computer Protocol. My colleague Pierre just spoke about the Internet Computer Protocol in a lot of depth, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. But my role there is improving the protocol's efficiency, specifically so that it can run larger AI models more efficiently by introducing GPUs and other technical tricks that we may get into eventually.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Jorge Antonio, CTO and co-founder of the Toma Network, and we are building decentralized AI cloud platform with privacy-enhanced features.
Hello, I'm Marco Bettiolo, the co-founder and CTO of Sensei. At Sensei, we are the human experts in AI replication.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introductions. This will be probably the most technical panel of the day. And we've been talking a lot about AI, but George, could we start with you explaining the components of AI? And I know that there's so many, but I would like you to mainly focus on machine learning and natural language processing, and why is it so important and like a vital component of AI?
Yeah, exactly. So AI is like it's a huge field of computer science and math. So to give you a hint, like most cited papers in CS come from AI. And you have plenty of different topics in AI. You have classification problems, you have unsupervised learning, etc. And you have for example, I worked in the past with financial data and time series forecasting for financial decision making in the markets and trading, etc. So over the past 2 years or so, with the advent of generative AI, with OpenAI, ChatGPT, and whatnot, we have seen models like ChatGPT and GPT-4o, etc., that they are what we call generative AI, and because they are actually generating content. And if you do so in, for example, in a text-based way, you call this natural language processing, which basically is any artificial intelligence pipeline applied to text. And basically, over the past 2 years, we have seen this tremendous boom in AI, because these models now, they can generate clever and intelligent answers, right? They can reason about difficult problems, and this is all through parsing text and learning the very fine-grained representations of intelligence within text and whatnot.
Thank you so much for that. And Marco, could you explain to us what are expert systems and why they are so important?
Okay, so it's a very interesting topic. Expert systems are, I would say, made of 3 components. One is a rule-based knowledge, where based on certain information, data, some outputs should happen, and then an inference engine on top of that, so kind of more hard-coded path can be applied to more generic situations, and then a way for a user experience for human experts to kind of translate their expertise into these systems. So there needs to be a way to manage, improve, expand. It's a very, very interesting topic because, for example, let's say you take the top 1,000 doctors that are very good at reading X-ray scans. If you codify that into an expert system, you can then have the best expertise of the best doctors scan any X-ray for 24 hours 7 with consistent outcome and high availability. the drawback is that it requires a lot of human work to get this system put together.
And Islam, I have a question for you. Now that we have a slightly better understanding of what AI is, I know that the Internet Computer is building these decentralized networks to support different AI models. So could you explain why is it important to have decentralized system on this fundamental layer to be able to build decentralized systems on top of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, maybe the word decentralized, it's used very often in these types of conferences, and it can be a loaded term that means different things to different people. And it's important to look at it from the lens of what are the benefits of decentralization within the context of running an AI model. And if you look at, let's say, the history of the past 10, 15 years of the internet, you've seen this coalescing of power and of our digital data into the handful of just a very few number of companies. And when you see the trend of AI, as AI becomes more and more useful, the more, by definition, the more data that it will need to know about you in order for it to increase its utility. And so we're really heading into a direction where this very small pool of companies are going to get more and more ingrained into our lives. And so the benefits, when I think of decentralization, the benefits that I see personally is trust and control. And when I look at the work that we're doing at the Internet Computer, what it allows you to do, you can build services, regardless of whether it's decentralized or not. It is, but if you look at it from a merit perspective, it allows you to build a service, and then I can prove to you, or I can give guarantees about how this service behaves. So, for example, let's say we have a transcription service, and I want to summarize a meeting. I can give you a proof that my transcription service is going to transcribe your meeting, but beyond that, it's not going to retain this data. And so it really gives you the ability to build services that you can trust, and it gives the users, on the other hand, the control, knowing that their data is used in a very specific way and is not being used in a way that they don't intend it for it to be used.
And Islam touched on data, and Jack, I know that you're specializing within that field. So could you explain the importance of providing decentralized data sets to AI models rather than providing comparatively centralized data sets, but also the biases that might emerge if we provide them with a very centralized data set?
Yeah, so, I mean, for us, we're more focused on just making that data accessible. So, I mean, as he mentioned before, a lot of these big companies are now sort of locking down your data. You know, Facebook, Reddit. Reddit just became profitable, and there's a reason why, right? They made a deal with ChatGPT. Now, that's your data you're consuming to Reddit, but you're not getting a share of ownership. So what we're focusing on is really making sure that AI builders could still have access to this data to train the AI models. Obviously, depending on the data set, there will be biases. And for things more like personal information, that's something that you want to keep control and you don't want to share. So our goal is just to really make sure that a data set is open. In terms of biases in the data, that's something that we're also working on, where we are creating these data sets to make sure that for specific models, specific purposes, that those data sets are diverse and includes a diverse view of different users. So for example, you don't want to just stick to like Wall Street bets, you know, as your training data set for how to run a financial agent for your company.
Nice. And Marco, just to bring back the conversation to this like slightly technical side, what are the main challenges that developers face when they're training a new model? And for the developers in the room, what would you advise them when it comes to training a new model? What should they keep an eye on?
That's a big question, right? So if I look at it from practically, the big problem is that the bar from the commercial offerings like Anthropic, OpenAI, and so on is extremely high. And they're investing billions into this. And for a normal developer company, getting access to the hardware necessary, the number of GPUs, the data, it's a challenge, right? So the topics on which they are working on makes my life much easier when I need to start doing this, right? We are lucky because we have some companies releasing work open source, so we can piggyback on that. but these components are, just the power consumption, the accessibility to GPUs, having good data to train on, and data of topics that you want to specialize on, right? Because maybe you want to cover a niche. So where do you find that niche data? Right? So these are all very, very challenging questions that I am asking myself every day.
No, it makes sense. And George, for you, it's like, could you elaborate on that question? But also, how do you establish the efficiency of an AI model? Because obviously the output is one of the ways, but let's say whenever I ask ChatGPT some technical questions, it doesn't always provide the right data. So obviously like inaccuracy in the answers, but are there any ways to establish the efficiency and then obviously work on it to make it more efficient?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, it's a very like sensitive topic in a way, because like these models, they are well known for hallucinate, right? So sometimes you ask a question that it's kind of obvious for a human, but they get it completely wrong. And for example, you cannot rely on the models just like that for automatize certain like processes that like automate parts of our lives, right? One way to force these models to have better performance is by inputting into the models more context, more data, where you don't need to be yourself providing this data, but this data comes from other sources and whatnot. So you have things like RAG, etc. And like we have over the past 2 years or so, like numerous like benchmarks that are used to like have sort of like a more quantitative metric of the performance of these models have been released, but we still don't have necessarily very precise tools to make the models super reliant, right? But we are getting there. We are getting better. We have better system prompts. We are like we as humans, we are also learning how to better interact with the models, how we should prompt them, which type of data we should feed into them. Yeah.
And Islam, could you just elaborate on this point of different data points and decentralization? I think there is some inherent contradiction that if we provide data from a lot of different data sets, then the AI model might hallucinate more, because then the data might not be the most reliable one. So obviously there needs to be some level of, what would you call it? Some level
Labeling, curating.
Curating, yeah, some level of curation. So yeah, how do you deal with that challenge of providing decentralized enough data set, but also someone that's curated enough?
Yeah. So personally, I haven't worked with projects that deal with decentralized data sets per se, but I do think this is where the tokenomics can come at play. So if you do end up creating a marketplace, these tokens are a way of cooperation at the end of the day. So if you end up building an incentive where people want to share their data, and the higher the quality of their data and the more useful it is to their models, the more that they can get compensated, then you naturally create this incentive for them to try to create data that is as high quality as possible. And to that end, you can design, this is the beauty when you combine code with incentives, you can really codify any type of incentive structure in order to really incentivize people to create the type of data that would help with whatever use case that one would have.
And it'll be a question for everyone. We're starting with Jack. How can we emerge this AI and the idea of tokenomics and the idea of data and providing data to companies and ensure the users are actually incentivized to provide their data and they capitalize on it? Because data is so important, but some people don't realize how important it is.
Yeah.
So could you just talk about the mechanisms of how to do it?
Yeah, so regarding how you incentivize AI in a correct way, I don't have the answer for that. What I could tell you that at RSS3, one of the things that we are pushing for is if we index your data, whether that is from a social media platform or a decentralized social media platform or from the blockchain, when there is a request for that data, we want to be able to give a portion of that request fee back to you. So that's something that we're working actively on, and this gives incentives for the users to provide high quality data about themselves, at least one they are comfortable with, to the open data set. Regarding how we coordinate it right now, we have 2 layers. We have the data storage layer, which is just, it's not a blockchain, it's just node runners that are collecting indexing data, and Google is one of our indexers. And we have the values layer, which the value layer is coordinating tokenomics about, rewarding these indexers for curating these specific sets of data that could be used for AI model training.
And then, Isam, do you have anything to add on tokenomics and data?
Yes, so maybe I'll add slightly different perspectives around the use case of giving data. I think for a lot of both individuals and organizations, we don't particularly have shortages of data in the large language models, the ones of ChatGPT and Llama and so on. But typically the shortage falls in, whether for organizations or individuals, putting their own data into the mix. So I want an AI assistant that has all the knowledge of something like ChatGPT, but is also aware of my calendar and my email and so on. And the same is true for organizations as well. And so it's less necessarily the question of incentivizing people to share their data. So a lot of the use cases, people would actually like to keep their data in silo. And to that end, that brings up some of the question of what would be the right infrastructure, where would you want to host this? On-prem is that certainly one option. Ideally, there's something that gives you sovereignty over your data. This is where decentralized infrastructure can come in, and so on. So I imagine most of the use cases wouldn't necessarily need people to contribute their data to the open space.
And maybe if I just jump in, I think George will have interesting perspective on this. Talk about keeping that data private, but also allowing it to be used for training models without revealing that data. That's like a really exciting view of. I had a quick peek at the white paper, but maybe George, you could elaborate much more on that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the So like personalization, tokenomics, all of these are very important aspects. UX is such an important metric for keeping and retaining users, right? So I will say that most users, like the average web user, is more than happy to share the data if they have better UX experience. It's more on the developers and the community, the protocols to actually bringing the tools to make the way that the data is accessed to be secure and private. And for sure, these ideas around how you can have data authentication for data sharing between different users without revealing anything sensitive about the data. So for example, I might want to have a better experience interacting with, let's say, ChatGPT or some open source model, and there is somehow an algorithm that can select someone else's data to feed into the prompt that can improve my experience, right? This could be very interesting, but you need to make sure that there is no privacy leakage, that there is the necessary data authorization, etc. And this is especially relevant for training AI models, right? Because I think the next wave of pushing the field forward in AI is to have access to more curated data, more personalized data, and this is only possible if the data is not owned by a single company, if it's owned by the people in a way, and people are willing to share the data to have better models that are better suitable for their own use cases.
And Marco, can you talk a bit more about this conception of privacy and data, and how do you enable companies to have access to your data, but they don't violate your inherent right to privacy? And how far away do you think we are from this reality where I can share my data through ZK technology and people can use it to train their models, but it will be just this metadata?
So I think there are quite a few different layers to this problem. So one is, the question you asked me, how can I share my data to train a model? So that means that I have some source data, there is some processing happening that results in a lot of numbers. That lot of numbers usually is difficult to trace back to the data that is coming from. So that could be, you're sharing the output of the work that happened on your node with your data. So in this way, you're keeping the privacy of your data to you, but you can use the useful output of the data. On the other side, it's another problem that we have, right? Because we let people load their knowledge in our system so that the replica can generate answers based on the person, right? And their stuff. And some people don't want their stuff to be on my servers, right? So, there are AI projects of decentralized nature where you can run on certain nodes. So it would be great for me if these technologies will allow me to pin the execution of the node of the owner of the data so that all the processing happening on their device, and I can just use the inference out of it without actually having access to the data. So I think, yeah, it's a lot of different angles to it.
And Islam, I want to start with you this time and move to computational power and why that's so important to AI. We've been talking a lot about AI today, and everyone talks about different models and how they can be used and the utility behind it. But I think the first issue that we'll face is like computational power and how do we ensure that we have enough for all the AI initiative that people want to build.
For inference, you mean, or for training, or for
It's
both?
more of a like storage, yeah, both, but also storage.
Yes, yes. So for well, for or training specifically, maybe I'll start with that. It's a very hard problem to do it outside of centralized organizations. I think the last numbers that I looked at for something like ChatGPT, a single run costs about $40 million to do. And that is centralized infrastructure, which would likely be more efficient than if you were to do it in a decentralized way. And so to that end, I think there's definitely a lot of really cool efforts in creating decentralized GPU marketplaces. I think time will tell how that pans out and whether that would be a serious competitor to some of the big players. And in terms of inference, I think there are, let's say, two different moves. So one is there's this big push from within the AI community to try to make smaller models that run on device. So Llama just released a 1 billion and a 3 billion parameter model capable of running on mobile phones. So I'd expect a lot of the computation to be actually happening on device moving forward. And then there is the medium in the middle where you want to have larger computation. And this is where you see some players like Apple, they've built this private cloud compute, and they really trying to figure out an infrastructure that is private and can do larger computations privately. And then this is where I think the decentralized community has a space to fill, because Apple did something to have this private compute. It is only for Apple, and to a large extent you need to trust Apple. And don't get me wrong, I think Apple can be a trusted entity, but maybe you trust it now, but not 10 years from now. And this is where I think we can play a role, like with some of the projects and protocols that we're building, to fill that gap and to be the infrastructure where people can build and run inference on AI and have that, or AI inference in a way that they can trust and is secure and private as well.
And George, can I start with you? Can you identify the benefits and the challenges of having decentralized GPUs? Because that's something the entire crypto community is very excited about. But could you, mainly probably focus on the challenges, because we'll definitely face some challenges there.
Yeah, so there are a few challenges. So I will start with the more sort of like physical challenges and then move over. So one thing is that usually just having a single GPU is not enough to empower like these sort of applications. So usually you need to have multiple GPUs that are close together. We call it, they are co-located together to basically empower these models to make them run like fast and have larger sequences, input sequences, larger models, etc. So you need, basically this means that you need some like high capital upfront to be able to sort of like contribute meaningfully for like a decentralized network. There are some ideas that have been explored to kind of minimize this overhead, but this is still a challenge. Another challenge is like these GPUs, they usually tend to be like depreciation assets, right? You buy a GPU, they can cost you up to $30,000, but in 4 or 5 years, the GPU will be basically out of lifetime, right? So now you basically need to upgrade your like GPU data center every 4 years, right? Which is still not necessarily the best way moving forward, especially now where like the hardware market is also booming exponentially, right? Some other like questions is like the energy aspect. So if you need large clusters of GPUs, how can you be able to provide like enough energy without disturbing like the electric grid and whatnot, right? I think like decentralization and decentralized networks, they face these challenges as well. But I also think that by kind of like decentralized networks, they have the possibility to sort of like not rely on a single data center or a single provider of GPUs, so they can sort of like edge a bit the risks. And I think this is important.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm just cognizant of the time, and I instruct the panelists not to show their projects too much. So the audience probably doesn't even know what you guys do. So I want to start from Marco. Tell me a bit more about your project, what you guys are building, why is it unique, and where do you see AI in the next 3 to 5 years? You have a minute, around a minute.
Okay, so our project now, was born from initial need that we identify, which is patients with Alzheimer and dementia. You know, they know that their brain is going to degrade. So we're thinking, how can we make like a backup of their brain, a backup of their personality, a backup of their way of talking, their image. So we created a system that allows to do that. But we realized that it's quite hard to work with patients whose cognitive abilities are degrading, right? So now we are doing more on the B2B side, where, for example, we realized that in many situations, a professional is asked, I don't know, 80% of the time the same questions. So, for example, instead of answering them all the time, you can train your AI replica that does just the answers for you. Or, you know, once you train it, you can use it on the web, you can use it on Telegram, you can use it on Discord, and we are slowly rolling out all the different channels where you can basically train once.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I know that a lot of people are actually doing it, and I know a few prominent people within the industry that are training their own chatbots. George.
Really fast. So yeah, we are building at the Toma. We build like a decentralized AI cloud, basically platform. So we provide accessible compute with like security guarantees, privacy guarantees. We allow to run like any model. We have very user-friendly, developer-friendly toolkits and SDKs, APIs. So it's a very easy onboarding platform. It's fully decentralized. And okay, I still have a few seconds. Yeah, and we are basically building some application layer on top of it.
And where do you see AI within the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think in the next 5 years, like everything will be basically at the touch of a word, right? We will be able to interact with these systems, but just like we don't even need to have a smartphone anymore. We'll be able to say, I just want like lunch at this time, and I want to eat like sushi or something. This will happen just like that. Everything will be automatized in a way.
Thank you. Islam.
Yes, so Pierre just gave a keynote talking about the internet computer, so maybe I won't repeat everything that Pierre has very well presented. So to quickly recap, so I'm part of the DFINITY Foundation, building the Internet Computer Protocol. Maybe I'll talk about the Internet Computer Protocol within the lens of where I see AI in the next 3 to 5 years. So if you look at some parts of the internet history, it started as walled gardens, you had America Online, Information Superhighway, and eventually the Open Internet won. If you look at operating systems, everything on servers used to be proprietary, but eventually Linux took over. And what I hope with AI is that just like in the current landscape where it's very proprietary, I do hope that protocols take over so that there would be an open infrastructure for people to actually run their AI, and they can really put trust in some of these services, and without having to transition so much of their personal data and their power into the hands of very few companies.
Thank you so much for that. And last but not least.
So our SS3, our goal is just preserving the open internet. Like I think the previous panel speaker outlined it perfectly. AI is a centralizing force, and it's going to be more and more centralizing. So in order to keep it open and accessible, we need to have open data, and that's what we focus on. And I think crypto economics decentralization is almost like the best rail to build on top of it, just because imagine having to pay millions of people every day for their data contribution. There's no financial rail that's possible today, but with blockchain, you can. So that's what we focus on. We have an open agent framework that we're rolling out that allows you to plug and play different models and then use our system to train those models and leverage them to do different things like executing transactions on chain. So that's what we're doing at our SS3.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and listening to this panel. Hopefully you learned something new. Thank you, guys.